My daughter left her 5-year-old autistic son on my doorstep with a lie about just for the weekend, and then vanished without a trace for 11 years. But when my grandson and I came into a sum of $5.5 million, she suddenly reappeared, arm in arm with a lawyer and a face full of crocodile tears, demanding her maternal rights. My name is Shirley. I'm 72 years old, from the small town of Maple Creek, Colorado, and this is the story of how our quiet truth went up against her loud lies. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of love and community, please take a moment to hit that L key button, SB scribe, and leave a comment below. Could you ever forgive an act like that? Share your story, because every one of us has a record that deserves to be heard. 72 years, 40 of them spent at the Maple Creek Public Library, a peaceful marriage to my late husband, Paul, and a sweet little house at the end of a lane shaded by aspen trees. My life, much like the Dewey Decimal System I knew by heart, was orderly, logical, and predictable. I believed the final chapters of my life would be written in that same calm, familiar ink until one October afternoon in 2010, an afternoon that tore out the most peaceful page, forever changing the order of everything I'd ever known. Autumn in Colorado that year was heartbreakingly beautiful, a sharp and crystal clear kind of beauty. The air had that distinct high mountain chill, so clean that every breath felt like it could scrub your soul. I was sitting on the porch swing out back, a ritual of mine after lunch. Paul had built that swing with his own 2 hands 20 years ago, and its gentle, rhythmic creak was the soundtrack to my quiet afternoons. In my hand was a steaming mug of chamomile tea, its soft fragrance mingling with the scent of damp pine needles and the earthy smell of the soil after last night's rain. From my spot, I could see the whole backyard. The quaking aspens, Paul's pride and joy, were dressed in their finest robes, a yellow so brilliant it was almost blinding in the slanted afternoon sun. A light breeze rustled through, and thousands of leaves trembled in unison, creating a soft, whispering sound like nature's applause. The silence was nearly perfect, broken only by the hum of the last few determined honeybees of the season and the distant, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of a woodpecker on an old oak tree. It was a tangible peace, something you could feel on your skin, a quiet I had cultivated and cherished since the day I placed the retired sign on my desk. My plan for the rest of the day, like every other day, was beautifully simple. I would finish the last chapter of the Agatha Christie mystery I'd checked out from the library. Then I'd head into the kitchen to start a chicken and vegetable soup for supper, using my mother's recipe. Maybe I'd call Mrs. Peterson down the street, ask about her tomato plants, and complain a little about the squirrel that was stealing apples from my garden. A simple, predictable, and above all, safe plan. And then, the quiet was shattered. A foreign sound, out of place, harsh, cut through the peaceful symphony of the afternoon, the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. It didn't sound like the tired grumble of old Mr. Miller's Ford pickup next door, nor the slow, respectful pace of the mail truck stopping at each box. This sound was hurried, rushed, and filled with a strange kind of urgency. It sounded like someone running away from something. I set my mug down on the little side table, the amber liquid sloshing, nearly spilling. My heart, which usually beat as steady and reliable as the grandfather clock in my living room, skipped a beat and then started to race. A vague sense of unease, like a dark cloud rolling in from the horizon, began to creep over me. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, and walked around to the front of the house, the white gravel stones crunching under my shoes. That's when I saw it. A shiny, silver sedan, the kind you only see in the parking lots of office buildings in Denver, had pulled to an abrupt stop. It looked so out of place in rustic Maple Creek. A thin layer of road dust coated its body like a fine powder, evidence of a long and hurried journey. I squinted against the bright sun, trying to make out the person behind the wheel. The driver's door swung open with a dry click, and Melissa stepped out. My daughter. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the sun. She looked so different, so terribly different, that for a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The beautiful blonde hair I had loved, the hair I used to braid every morning before school, was now cut in some trendy, short style, but strands of it were matted with sweat to her temples. She wore an expensive-looking beige cashmere coat, but it was creased as if she'd slept in it. Her jeans were some designer brand I didn't recognize, and her high-heeled boots were sinking into the soft gravel. Her face was carefully made up, a perfect mask of foundation and mascara, but it couldn't hide the dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes and the tight lines of stress etched around her mouth. Her blue eyes, the same eyes that once sparkled like a summer sky, were now hollow, vacant, and looking somewhere past my shoulder as if searching for an escape route. "Mel?" I said, and my voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "What's wrong, honey?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the back of the car and opened the other door. And then I saw him. Daniel, my grandson. He was sitting perfectly still in the back, a small figure swallowed up by the child's safety seat. He was 5 years old, a beautiful boy with the same blonde hair as his mother and big, blue eyes. But those eyes, instead of taking in the world with curiosity, were fixed on the floor of the car. His tiny hands were clamped tightly over his ears, even though there wasn't a single loud noise around. His small body was rocking gently, back and forth, to a rhythm only he could hear. Melissa unbuckled him with a mechanical, almost rough efficiency and pulled him from the car. The boy didn't fight her, didn't even look at her. He just kept rocking, a tiny island of repetitive motion in a still world. Melissa grabbed a small blue backpack from the car, a backpack that looked alarmingly light, and led Danny by the hand toward me. "Just for the weekend, Mom," Melissa said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if they were racing to escape her mouth. "I just need some space. I'll call you on Sunday." I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. "Space? Mel, what is it? You look exhausted. At least come in for a cup of tea." I reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched back, avoiding my touch as if I were holding a hot poker. "I can't, Mom. I have to go." She pressed the cool strap of the backpack into my hand and gave Danny a little push in my direction. The boy stumbled on a piece of gravel and nearly fell, but he made no sound, just continued his rocking and kept his ears covered. My heart clenched. "Melissa, wait," I said, a note of panic creeping into my voice. "Is he okay? Why is he covering his ears like that?" "He's just being him, Mom," Melissa snapped, a sharp edge of irritation in her tone. "He doesn't like noise. Just keep things quiet." She was already turning away, walking briskly back to her car. Her movements were final, without a hint of hesitation, as if she'd rehearsed this scene in her head 100 times. She didn't look back at her son. Not one hug, not a blown kiss, not a single word of goodbye for the little boy standing lost on his grandmother's porch. Just a cold silence and a growing space between them. "I'll call you," she called out from inside the car. The door slammed shut, sealing any explanation inside. I just stood there, stunned, the feather-light backpack still in my hand. I watched the silver car speed down the gravel lane, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. I watched until its red taillights were just 2 tiny dots that disappeared around the bend at the end of the road. And then, there was only silence. But it wasn't the peaceful silence from minutes before. This was a heavy silence, thick with unanswered questions. The dust slowly settled, revealing my grandson, still standing there, a small, lonely figure in the wide-open space. He was still rocking, back and forth. His hands were still clamped tight over his ears. I took a deep breath, and the autumn air felt colder now. I looked down at the little boy. His eyes were still glued to the gravel at his feet. I knelt, trying to get on his level, my 72-year-old knees screaming in protest. "Hi, Danny," I said, my voice as soft as I could make it. "I'm Grandma Shirley. Would you like to come inside?" He didn't look at me. He didn't answer. He just kept rocking. I looked at the backpack in my hand. It was too light, far too light for a weekend trip for a 5-year-old boy. I unzipped it. Inside, there was a worn pair of dinosaur pajamas, a toothbrush, and a small teddy bear with a tear in one ear. No toys, no books, no change of clothes. Just the barest essentials, packed in a hurry. A cold dread crept up my spine, colder than the autumn wind. This wasn't a weekend visit. This was a getaway, and my daughter Melissa had gotten away, leaving her most precious cargo behind. I stood up, my joints cracking. I opened the front door wide, letting it rest against the wall. I didn't push him, didn't pull his hand. I just stood there and waited, my heart beating a heavy, painful rhythm in my chest. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, Danny stopped rocking. He lifted his head, not to look at me, but at the dark space inside the house. Then, slowly, he walked over the threshold, passing me without a glance. As he stepped inside, I saw him flinch. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the living room, the familiar, comforting sounds of my home seemed to be screaming at him. He moved faster, finding the corner of the living room by Paul's bookshelf, and sat down hard, curling himself into a tight little ball. His hands pressed even harder against the sides of his head. I gently closed the front door. The click of the latch echoed in the silence, and to me, it sounded like the finality of a gavel striking down a verdict. I knew how to organize books. But standing there, watching my small, autistic grandson trembling in a corner, I was struck by a terrifying truth. I had no idea how to begin to organize a shattered life. That first night, my house was no longer my own. It had become a foreign territory, a minefield of sounds I'd never noticed before, each one now a needle jabbing into the fragile silence Danny was desperately trying to maintain. The quiet Melissa had left behind was heavier than any scream. It settled in the air, thick in every corner, and I could feel its weight on my grandson's small shoulders. Danny remained in his spot on the old Persian rug in the living room, hands cemented to his ears, his body swaying to that private, unheard rhythm. His small frame was the epicenter of an invisible earthquake, and I was just a bystander on the shaking ground, completely helpless. I tried to do the things a grandmother is supposed to do. "Danny," I'd say, my voice as soft as I could make it, as if my words were made of glass. "Would you like a glass of warm milk? I can put a little honey in it." There was no response, just a slight quickening of his rocking. I went to the kitchen, trying to move without a sound. But the oak floorboards, whose sturdy beauty I'd always been so proud of, now betrayed me. Every step was a mournful creak. I held my breath, tiptoeing like a thief in my own home. The kitchen, my place of joy and comfort for so many years, was now an orchestra of torture. The low hum of the Amana refrigerator Paul had bought 20 years ago, a sound I had long since tuned out, made Danny flinch from the other room. The click of the furnace kicking on made his shoulders hunch. I poured milk into a ceramic mug, but the clink of the metal spoon against the side made him let out a low noise from his throat, a pained whimper. I froze, my heart aching. I poured the milk into a yellow plastic cup, one of the old ones I'd saved from church picnics, and brought it to him. I didn't dare get too close. I set the cup on the floor a safe distance away, like an offering to a small, mysterious deity. He glanced at it, a flicker of his eyes, before retreating back into his world. Dinner was a disaster. I made some frozen chicken nuggets, the kind I assumed kids would like. The smell filled the kitchen, a normally comforting aroma, but when I put the plate on the table, Danny just turned his head away. His gaze was fixed on the blank wall, as if the plate didn't exist. I tried macaroni and cheese, the universal kid-safe meal. Nothing. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He pushed the plate away with a frightening finality. Desperation began to seep in, cold and prickly. "Danny, you have to eat something," I pleaded, my voice starting to tremble. He just made a low, humming sound in his throat, a steady, monotonic drone. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, I offered him a box of saltine crackers. He took 3, ate them mechanically, without expression, and then set the box down. 3 crackers. That was his entire dinner. Bedtime was even worse. I led him to the guest room, which I had carefully prepared with fresh, lavender-scented sheets and a soft wool blanket I had knitted myself. I tried to help him brush his teeth, and that's when he screamed. Not a cry, but a raw, wild, agonizing shriek, as if the toothbrush was an instrument of torture. I recoiled, my hands up in surrender. Okay, I stammered. "It's all right. No teeth brushing tonight." He stopped screaming instantly, but his whole body was trembling. My heart broke into a million pieces. What kind of monster had I become in his eyes? I gently tried to pull the wool blanket over him. He threw it off instantly, as if it were on fire. I tried again, thinking maybe I'd been too sudden. He screamed again, louder this time. I left the blanket at the foot of the bed, backed out of the room, and closed the door, leaving it cracked just enough for the hallway light to peek through. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair in the living room, just listening. All night, I could hear his low, steady hum coming from the room, a constant, unchanging sound, like the engine of a ship lost at sea, and I realized I was just as lost as he was. The next few days passed in a fog of confusion and failed attempts. I called Melissa. The first call went straight to voicemail. "Mel, honey, it's Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please call me back. I need to know what Danny eats, what his routines are. I don't know what I'm doing." I called again that evening. Voicemail. The next morning, I called again. The mailbox was full. A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. A full mailbox meant she wasn't even checking her messages. She wasn't just avoiding me. She had cut the cord completely. The promise of just for the weekend now felt like a cruel joke. A week went by, then two. The silence from Melissa was the loudest answer she could have given. I was on my own. The initial panic slowly gave way to a grim acceptance, and from that acceptance, a hard-as-steel resolve began to form. I couldn't change the fact that Melissa had left, but I could change how I handled it. I stopped trying to force Danny into my world. Instead, I decided to become an explorer, a codebreaker, in his... I started to watch. I became a shadow in my own house, documenting everything in a little notebook. I learned that Danny's chaos wasn't random, it had rules. His meltdowns were always triggered by specific things: the roar of the vacuum cleaner, the sudden ring of the telephone, the way the sun hit his eyes through the window at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And his peace, too, came from predictable things. The first breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. After days of failed food experiments, I made a simple bowl of oatmeal. As I was scooping it, 3 raisins accidentally fell on top. I started to pick them off, but then I stopped. I brought the bowl to the table. Danny stared at it. He picked up his spoon, and he began to eat. He ate the entire bowl. I almost wept with relief. The next day, I did it again. Oatmeal. And I carefully placed exactly 3 raisins on top. He ate it again. That was the first rule I learned. Slowly, I discovered the others. Toast had to be cut diagonally into 2 triangles, crusts off. Orange juice had to be in the yellow plastic cup. The drive to his speech therapist's office had to be down Elm Street, with a right turn on Oak. Never the shortcut on Pine, or he would scream the entire car ride. My life became a series of unchangeable rituals. It was exhausting and restrictive, but it also brought a fragile sense of order. When I followed the rules, Danny was calm. And when he was calm, I could breathe. A few months after he arrived, early one morning before the sun was fully up, I found him in the living room. He was sitting on the floor with a box of toy cars I'd bought him, but he wasn't playing with them. He was lining them up in a perfect, long row, stretching from the rug all the way to the front door. At first, I thought it was just a random line, but as I sat down in my armchair and really looked, I saw something extraordinary. He had arranged the cars by color, but not by primary colors. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible gradient. A deep crimson car, followed by one that was a slightly more orange-red, then a truer orange, then a yellow-orange, a lemon yellow, a yellow-green, a lime green, and on and on. The shift in hue from one car to the next was so delicate I had to squint to see the difference. My 5-year-old grandson, the boy who couldn't say a full sentence, had the discerning eye of a master artist. He had created perfect order out of the chaos of a toy box. "That's beautiful, Danny," I whispered. He didn't look at me, gave no sign he had heard, but his little hand continued its meticulous work. That was the moment I truly saw him. Not as an autistic child, not as the burden my daughter had left behind, but as Danny, an incredible mind, working in ways I couldn't begin to understand. I saw the light inside the silent fortress he had built. Recognizing his need for order, I bought him some notebooks and a pack of colored pencils from the dollar store. I thought maybe he'd like to draw. But he didn't draw. He began filling the pages with symbols, circles, lines, dashes, dots. It looked like some ancient script, a code to which only he held the key. I asked his therapist about it, my heart full of worry. Should I stop him? No, Mrs. Shirley, she said gently. He's mapping his world. It's how he makes it feel safe. Let him. And so I did. I bought him more notebooks. My house was soon filled with these cryptic journals, each one a piece of my grandson's complex mind. He documented everything. The exact time the mailman arrived each day. The number of red cars that passed our house between 4 and 5 p.m. The broadcast schedule for the Discovery Channel. It wasn't a game. It was serious work. He was creating an archive of reality, an objective record of our lives. I didn't know it then, but he was laying the foundation of his fortress, the first bricks in a system that would one day protect us both. All I knew was that my little grandson was finding a way to survive, and it was my job to make sure he had enough paper and pencils to do it. The years that followed didn't pass like a smoothly flowing river, but more like walking a familiar trail through a dense forest. The path is always there, but every day the trees grow a little differently. The light filters through the leaves at a new angle, and the sounds of the woods are ever-changing. So it was with Danny and me. The basic rules remained oatmeal with 3 raisins, toast cut diagonally, the unchangeable route to school, but within that rigid frame, Danny's world began to expand, like the rings of a tree growing quietly inside its rough bark. The biggest change started when Danny turned 7. The mysterious symbols in his notebooks began to transform. The circles and lines, the private code only he understood, slowly gave way to letters, scrawled but clear, written in pencil. Then came simple, carefully printed words in all caps. Yellow cup, bus, school, home. They were the anchors in his world, tangible concepts he could capture and record. I didn't push, didn't teach. I just kept supplying notebooks and pencils and watched the magic unfold on the lined pages. I'd see him sitting for hours, mouthing the words as he wrote them, as if tasting their sounds on his tongue. Then one spring morning, as the first crocuses were pushing through the last patches of snow in the garden, another miracle happened. I was in the kitchen, making our routine breakfast. The smell of toast filled the air, the sizzle of eggs in the pan, our morning soundtrack. Danny was at the kitchen table, busy with his newest notebook, documenting something with intense focus. I placed his plate in front of him, scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast cut diagonally, crusts off, nothing touching, and turned back to the counter to get his orange juice. Why did she leave? The question hung in the air, not loud but perfectly clear, cutting through the sizzle of the eggs. It was like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending out ripples that seemed to go on forever. I froze, the wooden spoon in my hand suspended in midair. Had I heard right? For 2 years, all I had heard from him were single words, clipped requests like more milk or TV on. Never a question, never a full sentence, and certainly never a question like this. I turned around slowly. Danny wasn't looking at me. His eyes were still fixed on his notebook, his pencil still clutched in his hand. But he had said it. He had formed those words into a question that had been hanging in the air between us for 2 years, heavy and invisible. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. How was I supposed to answer? I could lie, make up a story about a long trip, an important job, but looking at his small back and his absolute seriousness, I knew a lie would be a betrayal. He spent his entire young life seeking rules and truth. I couldn't give him something false. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. I took a deep breath. She said she couldn't handle it anymore, Danny. I said, my voice thick with emotion. She said it was too hard. He didn't look up, but I saw the hand holding the pencil stop moving. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he started writing in his notebook again. I don't know what he wrote. Maybe my answer. Maybe just an observation about the morning light. A moment later, he started eating his breakfast, as if the conversation had never happened. I got up and finished cleaning the kitchen, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I was sure he wasn't looking, I slipped into the bathroom and turned on the faucet, letting the running water drown out the sound of my sobs. He had spoken. He had asked the question I had dreaded most. And I had told him the truth, the raw, painful truth. I didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it was all I had to offer, the truth. And oatmeal with 3 raisins every morning. I could only pray it would be enough. After that day, a new door opened. Danny began to talk more, not in the chattering way of other children, but in questions and observations. "Why does this leaf have 5 lobes and that one has 7? He would ask on our walks. "The number 4 bus is always 3 minutes late on Thursdays," he would announce with certainty. His brain was a relentless machine of observation and analysis, and now he had the words to describe what he saw. We had found our rhythm, a fragile harmony built on routine and silent trust. I thought we were past the hardest part. I thought we had found our trail through the forest. I was wrong. The forest was still there, and wolves dressed as well-meaning educators were waiting. The call came on a September afternoon. Danny had just started 4th grade. I was in the garden, weeding around my rose bushes, enjoying the last of the summer warmth. The phone rang inside the house, and I hurried in, my hands still dirty with soil. "Hello, Shirley speaking." "Hello, Mrs. Shirley. This is Principal Andrews." His voice came over the line, smooth, polished, the kind of voice I recognized instantly, the voice of an administrator. In my 40 years in education, I'd heard that voice 1,000 times. It was the voice that usually came before bad news. "Hello, Mr. Andrews. Is something wrong with Danny?" My heart started to beat faster. "Not wrong exactly, ma'am. We just wanted to discuss his classroom placement. His new 4th grade teacher, Miss Brennan, has a few concerns." Miss Brennan. I had met her at the beginning of the year open house. A young, enthusiastic woman with a perpetual smile. I had been hopeful. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Well, we feel that Danny would be better served in our classroom for children with special needs. The other students in the mainstream class are moving at a different pace." I gripped the phone tighter. His words were like stones thrown at me. Better served, special needs, different pace. They were all euphemisms. "Danny is keeping up with the classwork, isn't he?" "It's not an academic issue, ma'am. It's behavioral," he continued, his tone unwavering. "He doesn't participate in group activities. He doesn't make eye contact during circle time. Yesterday, he covered his ears during music class because it got a little loud. He has a sensory processing disorder. He's sensitive to sound," I countered, feeling the blood rush to my face. "Mrs. Shirley, we have a program specifically designed for children like Danny. It would be a less stressful environment for everyone." "Less stressful for the teachers," he meant. I took a deep breath, trying to smother the fire of anger rising in my chest. "I want an IEP meeting," I said, my voice cold and firm. IEP, Individualized Education Plan. It was our right. "Of course," he replied, a hint of surprise in his voice at my resolve. "I'll have my secretary arrange it." I spent the next 3 days preparing for battle. My little house became a war room. I pulled out all the documentation I had meticulously saved for the past 4 years. Thick file folders were spread across my dining room table. Report cards, progress notes from his therapy sessions, medical evaluations. Every single piece of paper that proved Danny's extraordinary development. I printed everything, organized it chronologically, and highlighted key passages in yellow. Danny's reading comprehension was at a 6th grade level. His math was 2 years ahead. His handwriting was neat and careful, each letter perfectly formed. The problem wasn't that he couldn't learn. The problem was that he learned differently. The problem was that his difference made them uncomfortable. And I would not let them put him in a box just because they didn't know what to do with a child who didn't fit into their pre-made molds. The meeting took place on a Friday afternoon in the school's conference room. The room was stuffy and windowless, lit by fluorescent lights that gave off a low, irritating buzz. The air smelled of a mix of stale coffee, toner, and lemon-scented floor cleaner. Principal Andrews sat at the head of the table, his face set in a look of professional gravity. Beside him was Miss Brennan, her smile looking forced. There was also a school psychologist and a special education coordinator. 4 of them, each with a thin file folder in front of them. I was alone, but my file was 4 times thicker than all of theirs combined. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Shirley," Principal Andrews began in a conciliatory tone. "We all want what's best for Danny." "So do I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "Miss," Brennan spoke first, her voice soft, dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Danny is a sweet boy, but he struggles with social cues. He doesn't interact with his peers. During group work, he just sits by himself." "But does he complete his part of the assignment?" I cut in. She hesitated. "Well, yes, but Mrs. Shirley, education isn't just about worksheets. It's about learning to collaborate, to communicate." "He is autistic," I said, enunciating every word. "Communication is harder for him, but he is trying. Every single day, he tries." The special education coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Pierce, leaned forward. "Our resource room offers a smaller class size, fewer distractions. He'd be with students who understand his challenges." "And with students who are not on his academic level," I said flatly. "That is not Danny." Principal Andrews put on his principal voice, the one I recognized from my own years in the system. A voice that sounded reasonable and patient, but was dripping with condescension. "We understand you want Danny in a mainstream classroom, but we have to consider the needs of all the students." "So you're saying Danny is being disruptive?" I challenged. "Not disruptive, exactly." "Then what precisely is the problem?" Mrs. Pierce opened her file. "Danny's social skills assessment shows a significant delay. His IQ test was inconclusive because he refused to complete several of the timed sections. Because they were timed, and it gives him anxiety. His therapist has documented that," I said, my voice starting to tremble with anger. "Which brings us back to our point," Principal Andrews concluded, as if he'd just won a chess match. "Danny needs supports that we can't fully provide in a regular classroom setting." That's when I opened my binder. I pulled out the first document and slapped it down on the table. "This is Danny's reading comprehension test from last month. He scored in the 97th percentile. That's a 7th grade equivalent." I pulled out a second sheet. "This is his math assessment, 100%, 6th grade material." I kept pulling out pages, one after another, creating a growing stack in front of Principal Andrews. "These are therapy notes showing his progress in communication, in emotional regulation, in tolerating sensory input. In 4 years, he has come further than anyone could have predicted. Not because he was placed in a special room with low expectations, but because he was surrounded by people who believed he could do more." Miss Brennan looked uncomfortable. "It's not about expectations." "That's exactly what it's about," I interrupted, my composure finally snapping. "You want to put him somewhere else because he makes you uncomfortable. Because he doesn't perform normal the way you want normal to look." The room fell silent. The buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed to get louder. Principal Andrews cleared his throat. "Mrs. Shirley, I understand your frustration. Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA," I said, my voice now as cold as steel, "Danny is entitled to the least restrictive environment possible. That means a mainstream classroom with appropriate supports. It does not mean segregation simply because he's different." I probably shouldn't have used the word segregation, but I was done being polite. "We are not suggesting segregation," Mrs. Pierce said quickly. "Just a more appropriate environment." "Then provide the supports in his current classroom," I countered. "A pair of noise-canceling headphones for music class, extra time for transitions between subjects. A quiet space in the library he can go to if he feels overwhelmed. Those are called accommodations, not removal." They looked at each other, a quick, shared glance. Principal Andrews let out a long sigh, the sigh of a man who knew he was beaten. "All right," he said finally. "We will draft an IEP with those accommodations. But if Danny continues to struggle—" "He won't," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. But I knew one thing for certain: giving up on him was never an option. That evening, I spread all the meeting notes out on the dining room table and began organizing them into a new 3-ring binder. I made color-coded divider tabs: medical, educational, therapeutic, legal. The hands of a retired librarian went to work with practiced efficiency. Danny walked out from the living room. He had just finished his routine Friday night cartoon. His yellow plastic cup was on the kitchen counter, in its usual spot. He stood there, watching me. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice had grown so much stronger and more fluid over the past year. "I'm making sure the school can't forget what you're capable of," I replied, not looking up. He came closer, looking at the piles of paper on the table. "Can I help?" I looked up, surprised. "Yes, Danny, of course." We worked together for the next hour. I showed him how I was organizing everything. He studied my system intently, then pointed to the therapeutic tab. These should be sorted by date, and then by type. Speech, occupational, and behavioral should be separate. I looked where he was pointing. He was right. It made much more sense. "Show me," I said. For the next 10 minutes, he completely reordered the entire section, creating a system I never would have thought of, one that was logical, clean, and perfect. I watched him, his hands moving with quick, focused precision. He understood organization on a level I never would: rules, structure, and order. They came to him as naturally as breathing came to everyone else. "That's very good, Danny," I said when he was finished. He nodded. No smile, but I could feel a quiet satisfaction radiating from him. That was the night I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. The little boy I had been fighting to protect was now beginning to build his own arsenal. I always thought that life's great achievements came after some big, loud bang. But Danny's success arrived in its own way, not like a clap of thunder, but like a seed that sprouts quietly in the dark and then suddenly reaches for the light, making everyone who sees it squint in amazement. It all started with Miss Henderson, Danny's middle school science teacher. Miss Henderson was one of those rare gems you find in the education system. A woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes that always sparkled with genuine curiosity. She didn't see Danny as a collection of diagnoses and IEP files. She saw his mind. She was the one who realized that when Danny was in class, staring intently at his tablet, he wasn't zoning out. He was building bridges of logic that no one else could see. One afternoon, she called me. "Mrs. Shirley," she said, her voice electric with excitement, "do you have any idea what Danny has created? He calls it Synapse. It's like a map for the brain. I used it, and for the first time, I understood quantum physics in a way no textbook could ever explain." I knew about Synapse, of course. I'd watched it evolve from scribbled diagrams on paper to complex structures on a screen. To me, it was just Danny's way of ordering the world. But Miss Henderson saw more. She convinced, or rather insisted, that Danny enter the Colorado State Science and Engineering Fair in the Software Innovation category. Danny, in his usual fashion, showed no excitement or nerves. To him, presenting Synapse to a panel of judges was as logical as documenting the train schedule. It was simply a transfer of information. I, on the other hand, was a nervous wreck. I ironed his button-down shirt 3 times to make sure it was perfectly crisp. I sat in the front row of the university auditorium in Boulder, my hands clasped so tight my knuckles were white, and listened as he explained the optimization of cognitive neural linking through a visual graphic interface with an astonishing calm. He spoke of his software not like an inventor, but like a librarian presenting a perfect cataloging system. And he won. Not just first place. He swept the competition, the Judge's Choice Award, the Technological Breakthrough Award, the grand prize. That night, as we drove home on the dark highway, the glittering trophies in the back seat, Danny said only one thing: "My system worked efficiently." It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, a law of physics. That's the peak, I thought. A couple of trophies for the mantelpiece, a dose of pride for an old woman, and some much-deserved recognition for my grandson. We would go back to our quiet life in Maple Creek, to our oatmeal and our notebooks. But I had underestimated the power of a good story. A few days later, a young reporter from the Denver Post named Susan Hayes called. She had been at the fair and was captivated by Danny's story. She wanted to do a feature. I was hesitant. Danny's world was so fragile. I was afraid the spotlight would shatter it. But Susan was patient and kind. She came to our house, not with a loud camera crew, but with a notepad and a small recorder. She didn't ask Danny how he felt. She asked him how he thought. She listened for a solid hour as he explained the logic behind Synapse, nodding and taking careful notes. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday paper, with a large photo of Danny at his computer, his face a mask of concentration, the glow of the screen creating a faint halo around him. The headline read, "The Quiet Mind: How a Maple Creek Boy with Autism is Mapping the Future of Thought." It was a beautiful article, respectful and profound. It didn't paint Danny as a tragic figure or some quirky superhero. It portrayed him as a unique thinker, someone who had turned his different way of seeing the world into a powerful tool. I read it over and over, and for the first time in years, I cried, not from grief or fear, but from a surge of pride so warm and strong it felt like it could light up the whole house. The world finally saw what I had always seen. And then, the snowball started rolling. First, it was the tech blogs. They picked up the Denver Post story, dissecting the technical aspects of Synapse. Then came the education news sites, hailing its potential to help students with special needs. My old landline, which usually only rang a few times a week with calls from Mrs. Peterson or the library, started ringing off the hook. Names I'd never heard of from places I'd never been. TechCrunch, EdSurge, Wired. I felt like a small-town gatekeeper standing before an information flood. Danny was unfazed. He simply created an email filter that automatically sorted the interview requests and partnership offers into separate folders. To him, this chaos was just another data set that needed to be organized. The real shock came on a Tuesday morning, in the form of an email with a very formal subject line, an inquiry regarding a potential partnership from EduLeap Incorporated. I'd never heard of EduLeap, but a quick Google search told me they were a titan in the educational technology industry, based in Silicon Valley. Their email was polite and professional. They expressed their deep admiration for Synapse and requested a video call to discuss a potential symbiotic relationship. "What do you think, Danny?" I asked, showing him the tablet. He scanned the email. "They're using the word symbiotic to mask an acquisition inquiry," he said. "But their sentence structure is sound. We should talk to them." The call happened the next day. Danny and I sat side by side at the computer in the living room. On the other side of the screen were three men in expensive shirts, sitting in a bright glass conference room with a view of the California hills behind them. They used a lot of big words: revolutionizing pedagogy, paradigm shift in learning, digital ecosystem. I only understood about half of it, but I got the gist. They wanted Synapse. They made an initial offer. It was a number with so many zeros after it that I had to count them twice. My head started to spin. I had to call Mr. Gable, the old lawyer downtown who'd helped me with my will a few years back. Mr. Gable, with his silver mustache and tortoiseshell glasses, looked completely out of his element, reading a 30-page contract filled with tech jargon. The negotiations took 2 weeks. It was a world completely foreign to me. Calls with California lawyers, emails back and forth about intellectual property rights, non-compete clauses, and vesting schedules. Through it all, Danny was the calmest person in the room. He read every line of the contracts, pointed out logical inconsistencies, and suggested changes with a stunning clarity. He didn't care about the money. He cared about making sure that his creation, Synapse, would be developed according to his original vision. Finally, they reached an agreement. EduLeap would acquire Synapse and all related intellectual property outright. The final number nearly took my breath away: $5.5 million. Wu bai wushuan mei yuan. I wrote the number down on a piece of paper, just to see what it looked like. It wasn't real. It was just a string of digits, an abstract concept. I had lived my entire life on a modest librarian's salary. My biggest thrill was finding a rare book on sale. This number did not belong in my world. After the papers were all signed and the money was wired to a new bank account, Mr. Gable helped us open. A quiet fell over the house again. It was a different kind of quiet this time. Not empty, but heavy with the weight of all those zeros. Our lives, on the surface, didn't change. We still had oatmeal with 3 raisins for breakfast. Danny still spent hours on new projects on his computer. I still gardened and read my books, but something had shifted forever. A financial security I had never dared to dream of, but also a loss of anonymity. We weren't just Shirley and Danny from the end of the lane anymore. We were a story. And that story, unfortunately, had traveled further than I knew. About a week after the deal was finalized, I was watching the morning news, a habit I'd kept from when Paul was still alive, and then there was my house on the television screen. Then a picture of Danny from the Denver Post article. A smiling anchorwoman was recounting our story, neatly packaged into a 3-minute segment with an inspirational music bed. And this incredible story, she concluded, her voice full of emotion, is not just about a groundbreaking piece of software. It's about the human spirit, and it ends with a multi-million-dollar deal. A fitting fairy tale ending for a remarkable boy and his devoted grandmother. I sat there, staring at the screen, a cold feeling spreading in my chest. Devoted grandmother, multi-million-dollar deal. They had turned our life, our quiet struggle, into a Hallmark movie short. They had broadcast it to the world. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that somewhere, in some stylish apartment in California, someone else was watching. Someone who had been absent from the story for 11 years. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Melissa. I wondered if she had changed, if 11 years had been enough to temper her selfishness, her impulsiveness. A part of me, the mother part that never stops hoping, prayed that she would be proud of her son, that she would feel some remorse. But another part, the more realistic part, the part that had seen the coldness in her eyes that autumn afternoon, felt a creeping dread. The spotlight on Danny wasn't a warm glow. It was, I realized, a lighthouse beacon, shining a path for all the ships to follow. The storm didn't hit all at once. It started as a whisper on the wind, a subtle change in the air that only the most sensitive could feel. After our story went national, my little house became an accidental tourist attraction. Cars would slow down as they passed, the people inside staring, as if it were a movie star's home. The mailman started bringing letters from strangers all over the country, expressing their admiration for Danny. I read them all, saved them in a box, grateful for their kindness but also a little unnerved. We had been pulled from our private world onto a public stage. Danny, as usual, seemed unaffected. He had started a new project, building a database of North American bird migration patterns using public data from the Audubon Society. To him, the outside attention was just an irrelevant data set, filtered out by the logic of his mind, but I couldn't filter it. I could feel the world's eyes on us, and I had a nagging feeling that one particular pair of eyes, a pair I hadn't seen in 11 years, was watching too. The wait ended on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the story aired. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, called me. "Shirley," she said, her voice a little hesitant, Do you do the social media thing?" "Oh, heavens no, Martha," I chuckled. "You know me. A good book and a cup of tea are all the company I need." "Well, you might want to take a look this time," she said, her tone heavy with meaning. "My daughter, Susan, she just showed me something on her Instagram. It's about your Melissa." My heart did a little flip-flop. "Melissa? What about her?" "I don't rightly know how to explain it. You just have Susan show you. She's talking about Danny." After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. A familiar coldness began to creep into my veins. Finally, I worked up the courage, took Danny's tablet, a device I only used for reading the news and playing Sudoku, and typed Melissa Cooper Instagram into the search bar. And there she was. A profile under the name @MindfulMel. The profile picture was a Melissa I barely recognized. She was sitting in a lotus pose on a sunny beach, eyes closed, a serene smile on her face. Her bio read, "A journey to inner peace, mother, storyteller, seeker of light." She had over 200,000 followers. Hundreds of beautifully curated photos scrolled by, artfully arranged vegan meals, inspirational quotes laid over sunsets, and selfies of her in expensive yoga outfits. She had built herself a perfect world, an empire of manufactured serenity. And then I saw the latest post. It was a video, uploaded just a few hours earlier. The thumbnail was a close-up of Melissa's tear-streaked face, artistically framed. The title, in a soft, flowing font, read, "The Truth About My Son's Journey and a Mother's Pain." My hands were shaking as I pressed play. The video began. Melissa was sitting in a bright room, probably her living room. She wore a cream-colored sweater that looked soft and comforting. Her hair was in a deliberately messy bun, with a few tendrils framing her face. She looked directly into the camera, her blue eyes glistening with tears. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice cracking and thick with emotion. "For the last few weeks, so many of you have sent me the articles about a remarkable young boy, a young genius named Daniel. And I'm here today to tell you that Daniel is my son." She paused, covering her mouth as if to stifle a sob. "I've been silent for so long," she continued, "because the pain was too great and because I wanted to protect his privacy. But now that his story is out in the world, I feel it's my responsibility to share my truth." She took a shaky breath, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Years ago, I had to make the most painful decision of my life. I had to leave my son. I was not a bad mother. I was a mother who was broken." She spun a polished, tragic tale of struggling with crippling postpartum depression and anxiety, of feeling unequipped to care for a special needs child. "I left him in the care of my mother," she said, her voice dripping with false gratitude, "a wonderful woman for whom I will be forever grateful. But my leaving was not an abandonment. Not a single day went by that I didn't think of him. I have been supporting him from afar, quietly, in the best way I knew how." And then she produced the proof. The screen cut to images of Western Union money transfer receipts, made out to my address. I squinted. The numbers looked real. $200 in May of 2012, $300 for Christmas in 2014. Then came screenshots of emails, supposedly sent to an old email address of mine that I had never created. "Mom, sending a little something for Danny. Get him something nice for Christmas," one read. "Missing him so much today. Can you send me some new pictures?" Read another, all written in a loving, concerned tone, a perfectly staged performance. "I never wanted to make any of this public," Melissa concluded, her face back on the screen, "because a mother's love doesn't need an audience. But I can't stay silent while my son's story is being told with a piece missing. I am a part of that story. I always have been." The video ended. I sat there, stunned, the tablet heavy in my lap. A wave of nausea rolled in my stomach. She had turned her desertion into an act of sacrifice. She had twisted her 11 years of silence into a narrative of quiet, maternal love. She had lied. She had lied to 200,000 people, and she had done it without a shred of shame. The comments below the video were a flood of sympathy. "You are so strong, Mel," one person wrote. "What an amazing mother, to put your child first," said another. "Don't let anyone judge you. We have your back." Thousands of them. They believed her. All of them. I turned off the tablet, but her words and her image were burned into my mind. I walked into Danny's room. He had his headphones on, completely lost in the world of migratory birds. He had no idea that his mother had just rewritten his past, had just cast him as a character in her own tragic play. I stood there, watching him, and a cold rage, a rage unlike any I had ever felt in my life, began to build inside me. This wasn't just a lie anymore. This was a theft. She was trying to steal our story. Our life for the next few days felt strange, surreal. I didn't tell Danny about the video. I wanted to protect him from that poison for as long as I could. But I could feel the shift in the town's atmosphere. At the grocery store, I caught curious glances, heard hushed whispers behind my back. A few of my old friends from my book club called, asking vague, probing questions. They had seen it. The world had seen it. And then, 2 weeks later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived. It was postmarked from a law firm in Los Angeles. Inside was a set of legal documents, printed on the finest paper. It was a petition. Melissa, my daughter, at Mindful Mel, was suing me for legal financial guardianship of her minor son, Daniel Cooper. I read the cold, impersonal words over and over. "Miss Shirley Cooper, while her care is appreciated," the petition read, "does not possess the financial expertise to manage an estate of this magnitude. Our client, as his birth mother and a successful entrepreneur, is better positioned to secure his financial future." Successful entrepreneur. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Attached to the petition was a copy of all the evidence she had posted online. The fake receipts, the fabricated emails. They looked so professional. So convincing. That night, I sat at the dining room table, across from Danny. The legal file sat between us like a wall. I knew I couldn't hide it from him any longer. "Danny," I began, my voice unsteady. "Your mother. She's been in touch." He looked up from his book on bird species, his blue eyes watching me intently. "In what capacity?" I pushed the stack of papers toward him. He took it and began to read. His face was a perfect mask of neutrality. He turned each page calmly, his eyes scanning the complex legal jargon with speed. He read everything. When he was finished, he set the stack down neatly. "This data is incorrect," he said, his voice as even as a news report. "The transfer records do not correlate with your bank statements. The recipient email address did not exist on Google's servers during the time period specified. The sentence structure in the emails indicates a 72% probability that they were written by an AI text generation tool, not by a human." I stared at him, stunned. While I was drowning in a turmoil of emotions, anger, hurt, fear, he was analyzing the situation like a scientist. He didn't see a mother trying to reclaim her son. He saw a faulty data set. "What do we do, Danny?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't coldness or detachment. It was a steely determination. "We correct the data," he said. "We will present a more accurate data set." That night, I heard the steady click-clack of his keyboard coming from his room, lasting late into the night. I knew he wasn't just building a database of birds anymore. He was building our arsenal. If Melissa's video was the first shot, the weeks that followed were a relentless barrage, aimed squarely at the foundation of the quiet life I had spent over a decade building. The outside world, that digital universe I had never been a part of, was now a battlefield, and I, a 72-year-old woman, was suddenly thrown into the middle of it without a scrap of armor. Life in Maple Creek changed. The initial curiosity of my neighbors gave way to an awkwardness, an invisible distance. When I was out in my garden, Mr. Miller from across the street, who had waved to me every morning for 20 years, now just gave a stiff nod and quickly turned away. At the Safeway, I could feel the sideways glances, hear the whispers that died down as I walked past an aisle. They weren't being malicious, I knew. They were just ordinary people caught in a complicated story, a drama in which my daughter had cast herself as the heroine, which, by default, made me the villain. I had hired Mr. Gable, the old lawyer who'd helped us with the EduLeap contract. He was a good man, an honorable man of the old school who believed in handshakes and a person's word. But as I spread Melissa's glossy legal documents across his old oak desk, I could see the worry in his eyes behind his tortoiseshell glasses. "This looks very professional, Shirley," he said, his finger tracing the embossed seal on the paper. "Her lawyers are a big firm out of LA. They're good at this. They know how to spin a narrative." "But it's a false narrative, Arthur," I said, my voice trembling with helplessness. "It's all lies." "I believe you," he said gently. "The problem is, how do we prove it? A mother's love is a hard thing to argue against in a courtroom, especially when she's got a whole army of online fans cheering her on." And that army was growing. Melissa didn't stop with one video. She launched a full-blown campaign. Every day, she posted something new, another piece of her fabricated story. One day, it was an old picture of Danny as a toddler, one I had sent her years ago, with the caption, "Miss this smile every single day. Number, unbreakable bond." The next, it was a long post about the challenges of parenting an autistic child, filled with pop psychology terms she'd picked up somewhere, positioning herself as an expert. The cruelest blow came on a Tuesday night. She held a live stream, a concept I was only just learning about. Mrs. Peterson's daughter helped me pull it up. I saw my daughter's face, softly lit, talking to thousands of unseen viewers. "I know a lot of you are wondering," she said, her voice modulated to sound both strong and wounded, "why I have to take this to court, why I can't just work this out privately with my mother. The truth is, I've tried, but my mother, she's from an older generation. She loves Danny, I don't doubt that, but she doesn't understand the modern world. She's kept him isolated." My throat tightened. Isolated? Me, who had fought the entire school system to get him included. "She's scared," Melissa continued, her eyes looking directly into the camera with feigned sympathy. "She's afraid that if I come back, she'll lose her place. She's not used to sharing, and I'm afraid. I'm truly afraid that she's taking advantage of Danny's condition." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, venomous and heavy. "All that money. It's overwhelming. And I just want to make sure it's being used for my son's best interest, not to satisfy an elderly woman's sense of control." That was the knife twist. A sharp, calculated blade right to the heart. She hadn't just made me a villain, she had twisted my love, my sacrifice, into something ugly and manipulative. I shut off the tablet. I couldn't watch anymore. That night, for the first time since Danny arrived, I felt completely and utterly alone. Not even the quiet presence of him in the next room could chase away the feeling that the world had turned against me. I sat in the kitchen in the dark, and I cried. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the innocence of the world I had once believed in, and for my own powerlessness. Through all of this, Danny maintained an almost complete silence on the matter. He stuck to his daily routines. He had his breakfast, he went to school, and he spent hours on his bird project. But something had shifted. His focus seemed even more intense. His room, the door now almost always closed, often had a light on late into the night. The sound of his keyboard became the steady soundtrack to my sleepless nights. One evening, I brought him a glass of warm milk. I knocked softly and entered. The room was dark, lit only by the cool blue glow of the 3 large computer monitors he had set up. The screens were no longer filled with images of birds in flight. They were filled with lines of code, spreadsheets, and complex network diagrams that looked like digital constellations. "What are you doing, Danny?" I asked softly. He didn't turn around. "Cleaning," he replied, his voice flat. "There's a lot of signal noise. I need to organize it." I looked at one of the screens. It showed a network map. In the center was a large circle labeled @MindfulMel. From it, hundreds of lines radiated out, connecting to smaller circles, the names of followers, other influencers, websites she had cited. He was mapping his mother's entire digital ecosystem. "The lawyer says we're on the back foot," I said, my voice full of despair. "He says her story is very compelling." "A story is not data," Danny replied, his fingers never ceasing their dance across the keyboard. "A story can be changed. Data can't. I just need to find the right data sets." I didn't fully understand what he was doing, but I understood one thing. While I was drowning in a sea of emotion, Danny was navigating the hurricane like an oceanographer. He wasn't fighting the waves. He was studying the currents underneath. He was no longer just a subject in this story. He had become the lead scientist, and Melissa's entire online world was his specimen. My helplessness began to be replaced by a fragile sliver of hope. I didn't know what this arsenal he was building would look like, but I trusted him. I trusted his unshakable logic, his relentless pursuit of the truth. Melissa's smear campaign continued to escalate. She started having experts, a child psychologist who had never met Danny, a financial consultant on podcasts, to talk about the dangers of elderly asset management and the importance of a child's connection to their birth mother. Every post, every interview was another cut. I stopped reading the news, stopped answering the phone for unfamiliar numbers. I retreated into my little house like a snail into its shell. The world outside was too loud and too cruel. My only peace was in my daily routines with Danny, and the steady click-clack of the keyboard from his room, the sound of a tireless machine working in the dark, analyzing, organizing, and preparing for the final battle. I didn't know what he would find, but I knew he wouldn't stop until he found the truth. In the middle of those darkest weeks, when I felt like a tiny island about to be swallowed by a tidal wave of lies, something unexpected happened. The light didn't come from a courtroom or a computer screen. It came from the familiar streets of Maple Creek. It came from the people I had greeted every day for 40 years, the faces that had become the familiar tapestry of my life. It started small. There was a knock on my door one Saturday morning. I hesitated. Ever since Melissa's campaign began, every ring of the doorbell sent a jolt of anxiety through me, a fear that it was a curious reporter or someone coming to cast judgment. But this knock was gentle and patient. I peeked through the small window and saw Mr. Miller, my neighbor, from across the street, standing on the porch, holding a plate covered carefully with foil. Mr. Miller was a man of few words, a retired carpenter with calloused hands and a weathered face. We'd been neighbors for 20 years, but our conversations rarely went beyond pleasantries about the weather. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Morning, Shirley," he said, his voice a low rumble. He held the plate out to me. "The wife, she made some blueberry scones. Figured you and the boy might like some." "Oh, that's so kind. You shouldn't have," I stammered, touched by the simple gesture. Mr. Miller nodded but didn't turn to leave. He looked past me for a moment, then back at me, a flicker of hesitation in his kind eyes. We've seen the news," he said quietly. "It's a whole mess. The wife and I, we don't believe a word of it." I felt my eyes well up. "Thank you, Robert. That means more than you know." "Nothing to it," he said. "We live here. We have eyes. I saw you pushing that swing for him when he was little. I saw you walk him to the bus stop every morning, rain or shine. I never saw anyone else. Not once." He paused, as if he'd said too much. "Well, the scones'll get cold. You take care now, Shirley." He turned and walked back to his house, leaving me standing there with a warm plate of scones in my hands and an even warmer feeling spreading through my chest. It wasn't just a plate of scones. It was a statement. It was a testimony. And it was only the beginning. A few days later, I got a call from Miss Henderson, Danny's old science teacher. "Mrs. Shirley," she said, her voice full of fire. "I've spoken to a few of the other teachers who had Danny. Mrs. Davis from 3rd grade, Mr. Peterson from 5th. We are all just furious about what your daughter is saying online. We want to help. Can we write letters for your lawyer? We have the records of all the IEP meetings, the notes that show you attended every single one, while the other parent chair was always empty." The tears came again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "You would do that, Miss Henderson?" "It's the least we can do," she said firmly. "Danny is a special kid, and you are a phenomenal grandmother. We will not let anyone rewrite that history." It was as if Mr. Miller's scones had broken a dam of silence. Kindness began to flow through the town. When I went to the library to return my books, Mrs. Gable, my lawyer's wife and the current head librarian, pulled me into her office. "Shirley," she said, closing the door, "our book club. They want you to know they are 100% behind you. They remember all the times you had to cancel at the last minute because Danny had a sudden therapy appointment. They remember how you glowed when he started speaking in full sentences. They know the truth." She handed me a card, signed by every member of my book club, filled with words of encouragement and small memories. "We are with you," one wrote. "The truth will win," wrote another. Even the kids in town got involved. One afternoon, as Danny was walking home from school, a group of his classmates stopped him. I saw it from the kitchen window, my heart leaping into my throat, afraid they were going to tease him. But they didn't. A boy named Sam, the captain of the basketball team, handed Danny something. It was a basketball, signed by the entire team. "Heard you were having some trouble," Sam said, looking a little embarrassed. "My mom says adults are dumb sometimes. We just wanted you to know, we think you're cool. That software thing you did, that was sick." That night, Danny put the basketball on a shelf in his room. He didn't say anything about it, but I saw him glance at it from time to time, an object completely alien to his logical world, yet deeply meaningful. The biggest show of support came from the one place I never expected. Mr. Gable called me one evening, a rare excitement in his voice. "Shirley, you're not going to believe this. I just got an email from the high school principal, Mr. Andrews." Mr. Andrews, the man who had once wanted to shuffle Danny off into a segregated classroom. "What did he say?" I asked, skeptical. "He said he's been following the case in the press. He said that he was wrong about Danny all those years ago. He said you showed him and the whole school board what tireless advocacy looks like. And he has sent me a notarized copy of all of Danny's educational records, along with a personal letter testifying to your 100% involvement and Melissa's 100% absence throughout Danny's entire school career." I sank into the nearest chair, stunned. "He said one more thing," Mr. Gable continued, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "He said, 'This may be a small town, but we take care of our own. He's offered to round up testimonies from teachers, counselors, even the school bus drivers. And that's where the idea was born. It wasn't my idea, or Mr. Gable's. It seemed to spring up organically from the very soil of Maple Creek. If Melissa had her virtual army, we had our real one. Over the next week, Mr. Gable's small office turned into a command center. One by one, the people of Maple Creek came. They didn't come to gossip, they came to testify. Mr. Miller wrote a detailed account of the daily schedules he had observed from his window for 11 years. Miss Henderson and the other teachers compiled a 10-page report with specific records attached. Mrs. Gable printed out my and Danny's library records, showing the hundreds of books on autism, speech therapy, and computer programming we had checked out. Dr. Peterson, our family doctor, provided a medical summary, with my permission, documenting every vaccination, every checkup, and the one name that always appeared under Guardian, Shirley Cooper. Even the manager of the Safeway wrote a letter, confirming that I was the one who bought that specific brand of saltine crackers Danny liked, week in and week out, year after year. Each story, each memory, was a single thread, and when woven together, they created an undeniable tapestry of truth. Mr. Gable compiled it all into a thick, heavy binder. He put a simple cover page on top. On it, he typed 3 words, "The Maple Creek Record." I held the binder in my hands. It was heavy. It was heavier than all of Melissa's lies combined. This wasn't evidence manufactured in the thin air of cyberspace. This was forged in real life, in the small, repeated acts of love and care witnessed by ordinary people. The night before the court date, I went into Danny's room. He was still at his computer, but this time, he wasn't looking at lines of code. On the screen was a detailed map of Maple Creek. Each house was a small dot. When he hovered the mouse over a dot, a small box of information popped up. Robert Miller, neighbor, witnessed 3,987 morning bus stop walk-ups, Maple Creek Middle School, 42 IEP meetings. Your attendance, 100%. Melissa Cooper's attendance, 0%. He had taken all those testimonies, all those statements, and turned them into data. He had systemized the kindness of a town. "Are you ready?" I asked. He swiveled in his chair to face me. For the first time in weeks, a tiny, fleeting smile touched his lips. "The system is complete, Grandma," he said. "We have 2 independent but compatible data sets, my digital data and the town's human data. They corroborate each other. Logically, there are no more gaps." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Danny." "You should thank them," he said, gesturing to the map on the screen. "Their data, it's very emotional. It's hard to quantify, but it's very powerful." I knew. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I was not alone. I had a boy genius by my side, and I had a whole town at my back. Melissa could have her hundreds of thousands of virtual followers. We had Maple Creek. And tomorrow, we were going to show the world the power of ordinary truth. The Jefferson County courtroom was in Golden, a city nestled between Denver and Maple Creek. The building was stately and old, built of red sandstone, but inside it felt cold and impersonal. The air was thick with the smell of old wood polish, ink, and a nearly tangible tension. The artificial light from the fluorescent panels overhead cast a pale, lifeless glow on everything. This was not a place for feelings. It was a place for facts, or at least, the most convincingly presented version of them. We arrived early. Me, Danny, and Mr. Gable. I wore a simple navy blue knit blazer, my Sunday best. Danny wore the button-down shirt I'd ironed for him, looking serious and older than his 16 years. Mr. Gable, in his clean but well-worn gray wool suit, carried a leather briefcase that bulged with the weight of the Maple Creek Record. We took our seats at our table, and I tried not to look at the one across from us, but I couldn't help it. Melissa was already there, sitting beside a man with slicked-back hair in an expensive Armani suit, who had to be the famous L.A. lawyer. My daughter looked like an actress about to take the stage. She wore a tasteful cream-colored dress, her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was subtly applied to look both beautiful and fragile. She was the picture of grieving elegance. When she glanced our way, her eyes held no anger or remorse, just a cool confidence. She believed her own story. She'd been living the lie so long that perhaps it had become her truth. A few reporters were in the back pews, typing away on their laptops. Melissa's media campaign had successfully drawn a crowd. Her drama was about to have its big performance. "All rise!" the bailiff's voice boomed. Judge Harrison entered. She was a woman in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that gave nothing away. She sat, put on her glasses, and glanced at the papers before her. "In the matter of Cooper versus Cooper," she announced, her voice crisp and clear. "Plaintiff, you may begin." Melissa's lawyer, Mr. Davenport, stood up. He moved with a practiced grace and spoke with a smooth eloquence. He painted a moving picture of Melissa, a young mother struggling with inner demons whose love for her son had never wavered. He spoke of consistent financial support and unrelenting attempts to stay connected. Then he started presenting the evidence. The forged money transfer receipts flashed up on the large screen in the courtroom. The fabricated emails were read aloud with dramatic flair. He even called an expert witness, a paid psychologist, who spoke of the vital importance of the mother-child bond, especially during the adolescent years. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Their lies sounded so polished, so plausible. Their story, professionally packaged, seemed to have more weight than my messy, unspoken truth. Judge Harrison listened intently, occasionally jotting down a note. Her face remained impassive. Then Melissa was called to the stand. She walked with a somber grace, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. And then she gave the performance of her life. With tears in her eyes, she recounted her tale of pain, sacrifice, and quiet love. She spoke of sleepless nights worrying about Danny, of Christmas gifts she sent but never heard back about. "I am not here to take anything away from my mother," she said, her voice catching, glancing at me with a look of profound pity. "I just want to be a part of my son's life. I want to use my experience to help him manage his future. It's all any mother could ever want." When she finished, there was a hushed, emotional silence in the room. Even I, who knew the truth, was almost swept up in her drama. "Mr. Davenport smiled, satisfied. "No further questions, Your Honor." Then it was our turn. Mr. Gable stood, looking small and old-fashioned next to the slickness of Mr. Davenport. But when he spoke, his voice was steady and full of quiet authority. "Your Honor, we do not have a tragic story to tell," he began. "We just have the truth. A truth built over 11 years, one day at a time." He called me to the stand. I walked, my knees trembling. But when I sat down and saw Danny's calm face in the front row, a courage I didn't know I had rose up in me. I answered Mr. Gable's questions simply and honestly. I told them about the first night, about the 3 saltine crackers, about the notebooks, about the fight at the school. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I just told it like it happened. During the cross-examination, Mr. Davenport tried to trip me up. "Mrs. Cooper, do you admit that you never had formal legal permission to raise your grandson?" "I had the permission of a mother who left him on my doorstep," I replied. "Do you have any proof that my client didn't send money? Is it possible you misplaced the receipts or simply don't recall?" "I have 11 years of bank statements. They don't lie," I said, my voice firm. After I left the stand, Mr. Gable said, "Your Honor, the defense calls its next witness Daniel Cooper." A murmur went through the room. Danny stood and walked to the witness stand with an unnerving calm for a boy his age. He placed his hand on the Bible but didn't look at it. He looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," Mr. Gable said, "we have requested a projector be set up. My client would like to present some data." Judge Harrison nodded. The large screen came down again, but this time it didn't show falsified documents. Danny connected his tablet. The familiar interface of Synapse appeared. "Good morning," he began, his voice even and clear, without a trace of a tremor. "My name is Daniel Cooper. For the last several weeks, I have applied my software, Synapse, to an analysis of the dataset pertaining to this case. My software is designed to connect seemingly disparate data points to create a logically verifiable, holistic picture," he began. A massive mind map appeared on the screen. In the center was a large node that read, "Claims of Melissa Cooper." "We will begin with the first claim." "Financial support," Danny said. From the central node, he pulled a branch. It immediately displayed the images of the Western Union receipts Melissa had presented. "This is the plaintiff's evidence." Then, right next to it, another window popped open. "And this is 11 years of bank statements from Shirley Cooper, verified by the First Bank of Colorado. As you can see, there are no corresponding deposits for the dates or amounts on these receipts. The corresponding lines were highlighted in red. Furthermore," Danny continued, "I have analyzed the metadata of these receipt image files. The creation date for all of them is within the last 6 weeks. I also ran a forensic analysis on the font and layout. They are a 99.7% match for a template available on the website fakereceiptgenerator.com. A gasp went through the courtroom. I glanced at the other table. Mr. Davenport looked stunned. Melissa's face was white as a sheet. Danny continued, cold and methodical. He moved to the next branch, communication attempts. He showed the fabricated emails, then a report from my internet service provider showing the email address Melissa claimed to have sent them to had never been created. He broke down the sentence structure, pointing out the repetition of unnatural phrases, showing the high probability they were generated by a computer program. He went on like that, demolishing lie after lie with cold, irrefutable data. Every claim Melissa made was juxtaposed with a set of counter-evidence, cross-verified from multiple sources. My and his schedules, pulled from Google calendars, school records, and even GPS data from my old phone, were laid next to the dates Melissa claimed to have visited, showing a complete contradiction. When Danny finished with his digital data, the courtroom was deathly silent. Even Judge Harrison was looking at him with unconcealed astonishment. "And finally," Mr. Gable said, rising, "we have one last data set to present." He didn't look at the screen. He looked at the people of Maple Creek sitting in the back rows. "Your Honor, the truth doesn't just live on servers or in spreadsheets. It lives in the memory and witness of a community." He walked forward and placed the thick binder on the judge's bench. "This is the Maple Creek record," he announced. "Over 30 sworn affidavits from teachers, neighbors, doctors, and ordinary citizens. They don't have algorithms or metadata. They just have their eyes and memories that can't be faked." Judge Harrison picked up the binder. She opened it and began to read. She read slowly, carefully. She read Mr. Miller's testimony about never seeing Melissa's car. She read Miss Henderson's letter about the IEP meetings. She read the doctor's statement about the sole guardian. When she looked up, her eyes were no longer impassive. They were ice. She looked directly at Melissa. "Miss Cooper," she said, her voice sharp, "do you have any explanation for these blatant discrepancies between your sworn testimony and all of this?" She tapped the Maple Creek record and gestured to the screen where Danny's mind map was still displayed. Melissa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her perfectly applied makeup was now streaked with mascara. Her facade had shattered. I, she stammered, looking to her lawyer for help, but Mr. Davenport could only give a slight, defeated shake of his head. Judge Harrison didn't need to hear any more. She brought her gavel down, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "The court has seen enough," she declared. "The petition for guardianship by Miss Melissa Cooper is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient evidence to believe that perjury and the presentation of falsified evidence have occurred. I am forwarding this entire case file to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation." She brought the gavel down again. "This court is adjourned." It was over. In the chaos of the reporters rushing forward, I just looked at Danny. He was shutting down his tablet, his face as calm as an undisturbed lake. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He had simply completed the task. He had corrected the data. He had restored the order. Our quiet truth, defended by cold logic and warm kindness, had finally won. Leaving the courthouse that day was like stepping out of a storm cellar after the tornado has passed. The air outside felt impossibly fresh, and the sun seemed brighter. The world was still turning. The trees were still green, but something inside of me had shifted forever. The chaos of reporters trying to get a word from us was just distant background noise. Mr. Gable deftly guided us out a side exit, and soon we were in my old Buick, driving toward the familiar mountains of Maple Creek. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there left to say? The truth had been laid bare, completely and undeniably. Danny sat in the passenger seat, looking quietly out the window at the passing aspen trees. I couldn't guess what he was thinking. Maybe he was analyzing the efficiency of his data presentation strategies. Or maybe, for the first time in a long time, his extraordinary brain was allowing itself to rest. I put my hand on his shoulder, and this time, he didn't flinch. He just gave a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had been through together. What happened to Melissa afterward, I only learned in bits and pieces from Mr. Gable and small news clippings. Her online empire, at Mindful Mill, crumbled overnight. A clip of the courtroom takedown, recorded by a journalist, went more viral than her tearful video ever had. The hundreds of thousands of followers turned into hundreds of thousands of accusers. The admiration they'd had for her curdled into contempt. Lucrative brand deals were canceled. Her account was flooded with a sea of furious comments before she finally deleted it altogether. She had built her life on a foundation of lies, and when the truth came out, the whole thing turned to ash. Legally, it was even worse. The district attorney's office did press charges for perjury and fraud. Facing the irrefutable evidence, she took a plea bargain. She avoided prison time, something that, in spite of everything, I never wished on her. But she got 2 years of probation, a heavy fine, and 1,000 hours of community service. In a final, bitter irony, her service was assigned to a support center for families with autistic children in Denver. The court, in its own way, was forcing her to confront the very world from which she had run. I never went to see her there. Some wounds, I figured, needed space and time to heal on their own, if they ever could. But Mrs. Peterson, on a trip to Denver to visit her daughter, saw her once by chance. She looked different, Shirley, she told me over the fence. No makeup, no fancy clothes. She was sitting on the floor, patiently showing a nonverbal little boy how to work a puzzle. She looked tired, but peaceful. For the first time in years, she looked like the Mel we used to know. I didn't reply, just nodded. Maybe when you lose everything you've built on a lie, you finally have a chance to find who you really are. I could only hope that one day she would find a real peace, not the kind staged for online likes. Life in Maple Creek slowly returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal. The respect people had for Danny had changed. They no longer saw him as that poor autistic boy. They saw him as Danny, the brilliant mind, the town's quiet hero. Kids from school would sometimes knock on our door, not to tease, but to ask for help with their math homework or a coding problem. And Danny, in his own way, would help them, explaining complex concepts with a stunning clarity. He had found his place, not by changing himself to fit the world, but by letting the world see the value in his difference. The money from EduLeap sat mostly untouched in the bank, managed by a financial advisor Mr. Gable had recommended. We didn't change our lifestyle. I still gardened, read my books, and had my tea on the back porch. Danny still pursued his projects with a singular passion. The only difference was a freedom from worry, a lightness I never knew I needed. A large portion of the money, at Danny's insistence, was used to establish a scholarship fund at Maple Creek High, specifically for students who demonstrated innovative thinking, regardless of their grades or circumstances. The child the system had once tried to cast out was now creating opportunities for others. And then one summer afternoon, about a year after the trial, I was sitting on my porch swing, reading a book. Danny came out, holding his tablet. He had grown so much, taller than me now, with a deeper voice, but his blue eyes were as clear as ever. "Grandma," he said. "What is it, honey?" He sat on the step next to me, a rare, close gesture. He turned the tablet to face me. On the screen was not code or diagrams. It was a version of Synapse, but it was designed differently. It looked warmer, more friendly. "I made something for you," he said. "I call it the Shirley Record." I squinted at it. It was a mind map of my life. In the center was a node that said Shirley Cooper, Branching out from it were nodes for recipes, memories of Paul, gardening, book club. He had taken all. My messy notes, old journals, and faded photographs from the boxes in the attic, and digitized them all. He had turned my memories into a searchable system. I tapped on the recipes branch. My mother's blueberry scone recipe popped up, complete with a photo of her yellowed, handwritten recipe card. I tapped on memories of Paul, and a short video clip appeared, an old, silent home movie I'd forgotten existed, of Paul grinning in the sunshine on a camping trip in the Rockies years ago. Tears, once again, streamed down my old cheeks, but these were tears of pure joy. My grandson, the boy I once thought couldn't understand emotion, had just given me the most precious gift imaginable. He hadn't just protected our past, he was preserving it for me. I turned to him. "Thank you, Danny. Thank you for everything." He looked at me, and this time there was no mistaking the smile that lit up his whole face. "You were always there to document my world," he said. "I just thought it was time I documented yours." We sat there in the comfortable silence of the late afternoon as the sun began to set behind the peaks. I realized then that I had started this journey in fear and helplessness, thinking I was just trying to survive. But I understood now that love, when it's patient enough, isn't just about survival. It's a creative force. It can build new worlds out of broken pieces. I learned that the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a little boy lining up toy cars in a perfect color gradient. Sometimes it's as simple as a neighbor bringing over a plate of scones. And sometimes it's as strong as the collective voice of a town that chooses to believe what it sees with its own eyes over what it sees on a screen. My life was no longer a straight line. It had twists and turns, hills and valleys I never could have anticipated. But as I sat there, next to my remarkable grandson, looking at the legacy of memory he had created for me, I knew I wouldn't trade it for anything. My name is Shirley. I'm 73 years old, and my story is still being written. And the best chapters, I've come to find, are often the ones you never see coming.